So today's training is on assignments and discussions. So it's going to be just focused on these two tools so that we can go really deep into the creation process, all of the settings and what they mean, how to grade those, or the different ways that you might review those, because I know we have a mixture of adult education instructors as well as credit instructors. And even if you don't use the grade book, which I know adult education doesn't typically grade things, there's multiple ways to kind of assess the activities that are in Brightspace. So we're going to cover those. And then we'll also cover the student experience. So what that looks like for them when they go in to submit to assignments and discussions. So as we go along, if you would put your questions into the chat, and I may pause in between to kind of answer questions, but what helps me too is because sometimes there's some conversations that are happening on the side, which is completely fine. But if you have a question that's specific for me so that I can easily filter through it, if you can put @Elissa before you start writing, so it looks like this, I put that in the chat, @Elissa, and then you ask the question, that'll help me kind of decipher through all the information that's in there to answer those questions, because I'm going to be looking off to the side to try to catch those chat questions as well. Also, if you're looking at the participant window, so I'll kind of back up, in our Zoom window, at the very bottom of that, you should see some icons, and two that I think you should have open is the participant window and the chat window. The chat will help you kind of ask questions throughout this or see what other people are saying. The participant window, if your name doesn't appear like what you would want it to appear as, or a way that I can identify you, you can rename yourself by hovering over your name and clicking more and choose to rename. And that way we can also pull this information and I know who I'm talking to. That's also helpful for you when you start teaching with your students, is when students are accessing Zoom as a guest, meaning they're not signed into all of their CCC accounts when they go into your Zoom session. Sometimes they'll show up as like iPhone, you know, or Samsung 10, and it's not their name. You can tell them to go change their name when they're in your meeting. So that, I just want to kind of reference that if you don't know how to change your name. It's you put your mouse over your name in the participant window and you choose more and rename. Okay, so the agenda that we're going to cover today is we're going to do assignments first, and then we're going to talk about discussions, and we'll talk about what assignments are, like what you would use those things for, as well as discussions. We're going to go through the creation and management of both, all of the settings, when you would use some settings over other settings, because in Brightspace, as you probably experienced now, there are so many ways, so many different things that you can do, because D2L really built it as a tool for instructors to kind of meet every single need that an instructor has. It's amazing. Sometimes an instructor will say, hey, I want to do this thing, but I don't want that, and I want this. And I'm like, wow, well, Brightspace lets you do that. And I never knew there was a use case for that reason why they had that setting. But there's a lot of settings to kind of think about. So I am recording this because it can be overwhelming, all the settings. So I want to try to balance the ease of it, like just creating them right away and not really thinking about all those settings. And then if you do want to think about all of the various ways that you can use it, we'll go through that too. Then I want to show you the student experience of how they're submitting to these things, and then how to grade these things that they're submitting to you, and then what the student looks for when they're, after you've graded them, you provided all this wonderful feedback, how do students go and see that feedback? So I want to give you the entire like full circle experience. And then we'll do the same for discussions. I'm hoping to spend, 25 minutes for each, so then I can have 10-minute sessions before the next training that's right after this, which is quizzes. So we'll see how this goes, and I'll keep an eye on the time as we go along. So I'm going to spend most of the training inside the course. I'm not going to go through a PowerPoint because I think it's easier to see everything live and kind of clicking around. So that's where I'm going to go here. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, I'm seeing nodded.
We good?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
just because I'm getting some messages that some people aren't hearing okay. Let me just make sure there's no other questions. Okay, great. All right. So I'm going to go into my Brightspace course, And where we're going to start is a lot of you were on our trainings yesterday, and a lot of you have been using Brightspace already for quite a while. Just going to mute everyone. There's two ways to create assignments in Brightspace. And if I were to back up for a second and kind of explain what assignments are, because in your class you might be thinking, well, everything's an assignment. They talk amongst themselves and they get participation points, that's an assignment. They do a reading quiz, that's an assignment. So you might think of assignments as this just general, these are all the assignments that are part of my class that make up their final grade. Brightspace has these three separate tools that are what you can call activities in Brightspace that make up all of those, what you call assignments, but there's these different types of tools in the system. So assignments in Brightspace are a place where students can submit work to you directly. So either uploading a file, so like uploading an essay, a Word document, a PDF, a PowerPoint, something that they've created, or writing right on the screen. Someone mentioned earlier while we were waiting for us to get started that they let students type in the text box, which you're going to see in a little bit, and then they can submit that work to you and that you can review it and assess it. So it basically takes away that element of students having to hand something in person, or God forbid you were doing this in the spring where people were emailing you all of their assignments because you're like, send me that thing, and then you're having to manage all those emails. What's nice about Brightspace is it basically puts everything together in one place when it comes to assignments. So I'm going to click on content first. There's two places, so there's multiple ways. I can't even say two, but there's two main ways that I'm going to show you where you can create assignments, and I'll explain the difference between each, but I'm going to be spending most of the time in the tool because the tool is where you're going to get all of the settings. But if you're just getting started, it's really easy to just start right away from content because you can think of content as your place to just build out all of the things that you need them to do. So you're just adding all the items that are part of a week's agenda items or a week's tasks or whatever it might be. So in this course that I'm in, I've got a few navigation items on the left. I have my syllabus module, I have my Zoom sessions module, and then I have week 1 and week 2. And I'm going to go into week 1. And I'm going to start building my assignments. So I'm just going to go through this process quite quickly because I actually want to shift to the assignment tool specifically. But for those just getting started, you can use this upload create button. And at the bottom of that is where you have all of the kind of interactive activities that Brightspace has. So new assignment is at the top. And so if you just wanted to come in here and you know you've assigned them this, either this Word document that you need them to complete or just initial tasks, like you want them to share with you an introduction, but that's kind of a bad example. But let's say you wanted them to send you to you specifically you know, why they're taking this class and those kinds of things. Something so you can get like an assessment of how they write, something like that. So we can think of an assignment in that way. Again, the difference between assignments and discussions, and that's why I kind of hesitated, was assignments are just to you and the student, so other students can't see what a student submits to you through an assignment. Whereas a discussion is meant to be a place where a student can still submit something that's like a piece of, like a Word document or text or an introduction, like I gave that example. But the idea with the discussion is that other students can see what they post and can respond to that as well. So assignments are just one-to-one, you and the student, and discussions can be all the students are seeing what everyone is posting. So I'm going to click New Assignment, and the process creating from content is very simple because it's meant to help you get started really quickly. So first is all you need is an assignment name. So in this case, I'm going to call this Assignment 1. And then you can choose, and you'll only have the ability to choose from here an individual assignment or a group assignment if you already have set up groups in your class. So I'm not covering groups today, but there are some knowledge-based articles on that, and it might be covered in some of the engagement tools trainings tomorrow. I'm not sure if it is. The next thing you want to decide is the submission type. So file submission is that a student is going to upload a paper to you or a document or a PowerPoint or a PDF of some kind of file that they're submitting to you. The second option is a text submission. So Brightspace doesn't let you do both. Like you can't choose file submission and be like, oh, any student who can't submit it can just type in the box. It doesn't give you that option. It's either or, the way that Brightspace is set up. So a text submission is like the example that I think it was Marilyn who gave, where students can type right on the screen their responses. And this is really helpful for students who are new with computers or are using their cell phones or tablets, and they may not have a Word document or Microsoft Office at their disposal. So a text submission is kind of an easy way. It's meant for those things that aren't like official papers. It could be used for this, write me 2 paragraphs about why you're taking this class, and just so you can assess the writing, whatever it might be. But text submission means they're typing right on the screen. These other 2 options that are in here are mainly for like in-person assignments. So Brightspace allows you to create these kind of assignment placeholders that students don't have to submit anything to, and that's what these 2 are. They're basically just a holding place for if you were doing something in class and you wanted students to still see in content that they had this task to do, that this assignment is due, but they're turning it in class. So these you won't typically use in the remote setting because it doesn't let students submit anything to you or upload anything to you. It just lets them kind of check off that they did it. So if that's something that's useful to you and you can think about that in that way, you can certainly use those 2. But typically if you want students to give you something, you're going to use the top 2 options there. So I'm going to do this first one as I'm going to do this first one as a text submission, because I'm going to do 2 so that you can experience both aspects of it when I go to submit as a student. This next option is whether or not students can see it. I like to, if I'm setting this up in advance, it's already going to be there, so I'm going to uncheck that box. But for you, if you're still building and you're not ready to make those visible to students, you can certainly leave that checked. And then in the instructions is where you're going to have that message. Write 2 paragraphs telling me about you and why you are taking my class. Once you click save, you've basically created that assignment. So this is the most simple, like I've already given them a place where they can write their submission and submit me something into Brightspace that I can grade. The only thing that's missing is that it's not actually connected to the grade book. You can still evaluate it. You can still provide some feedback to students, but you can't grade it, and it's not connected to the grade book, meaning you can't put a value on it. So down below is where you can add that when we're creating from content. I'm going to show you again creating from the tool later. So down here is where I'm going to choose that this is 10 points. I'm going to tell it how many points it's out of. And then I'm going to click this plus sign, which is what links it to a grade item. So Brightspace has assignments or activities in Brightspace, and the grade items are kind of disconnected. They can live on their own, or you can tie them together. So in this case, I want this assignment, I'm going to be grading it. I want it to show up in their grade book, so I'm going to add a grade item to this. So when I click the plus sign, it's going to ask me to choose a grade item type. 99.9% of the time, it's numeric. I'm not going to talk about select boxes during this training. So once I choose numeric, all I need for a grade item when I'm attaching it to an activity is a name and a point value. Those 2 things are really important, a name and a point value. And that's because Brightspace defaults the point value to 10. So if I didn't change, if I just put a name in, so I'm going to duplicate the name that I made this assignment, was called assignment 1. I'm going to call my grade item assignment 1. If I were to just click create, it will create this grade item with a 10-point value, even if I had put something different here. So if I put 25 here and I created the grade item and I just put a name in and clicked create without scrolling down through the options, it's going to make this grade item worth 10, but my assignment was 25, and they're not going to match. It's a very strange thing that Brightspace allows you to do, and there's reasons for it that I am not going to go into because some teacher wanted that, and so it's possible. But what you want to do in creating a grade item is a name and a point value. So I would scroll down to the section where there's the points, and I'd make sure that matches whatever I put here. So in this case, I did make my assignment 10 points, so leaving it as 10 is fine. There's no other settings I'm going to set on this grade item here. And I'm not really going to talk about it here because all of those settings you really want to set on the assignment. And I say that because if I kept scrolling down on this grade item, I'm going to see some availability information here. And I want you to know that this availability information is only on the grade item. It does not reference the availability of that assignment. So again, when you're creating grade items on the fly, you want an assignment name and a point value, and that's really all you need. So I'm going to click create, and the very last thing I need to do is click save. Because if I don't click save, I've created the assignment and I've created the grade item, but they don't talk to each other. So again, one of those Brightspace idiosyncrasies. Once I click save, they're all tied together. So that's everything I need to do what I need to do next. Now, those are really the only settings that you can set from here. There's a few others down here in these options, whether or not you let students submit more than one file at a time, what's collected, but I'm going to talk about all of that when I get into the actual settings in a moment from the tool itself. So really, creating from content, an assignment from content is a really fast process. We did a name, we did instructions, we did the assignment type, which was a file submission or a text submission, and then I came in here and I connected it to a grade item. So when I click back on content, I'll see there's the assignment that I've just created and the instructions for students to submit to. And we'll see in a moment, once I finish from the tool, how students actually submit to these things. This little icon is your indication that it is an assignment. It's something that students can do something with. So now if I go to the assignment tool, so something to know about content is anything you build in content is also getting stored in these back-end tools. And in this case, assignments get stored in your assignment tool. So you can find all of your assignments that you've created, regardless of where you've built them from. You can find them under the assessment dropdown under assignments. Okay, I'm going to pause for questions before I get to the tool because I see a few things coming up. Hold on. Yes. Margarita, text submission is typing directly on the screen. So if they back up. There was a recommendation from Professor Sayer that students should be encouraged to maybe type outside of Brightspace in case it doesn't save their work. I'm a fan of this. I did it when I was a student where I might write in something else and then paste it into Brightspace because I was afraid of losing the work. I haven't experienced how often that happens, but if students are working in it, it generally isn't a problem unless they're working on it for hours and going and coming back. It's not saving everything as you go, like you might experience in an online document or in an email where it's saving your draft as you go. That's a good point. Brightspace defaults at 10 points and assignments, the assessment points. We have multiple points for each question. So for an assignment, the assignment tool or the concept of an assignment is like one thing that they're submitting. So it's like one document, something that you've assigned in class. So the idea of like, write 2 paragraphs on this thing, they're submitting that to you and you're grading it. So holistically, that has a score value. If it's something like you're giving them a Word document to fill out and then submit, and there's like 10 questions on that they're going to fill out, you know, writing a paragraph for each, you would just indicate the point value of the overall assignment, not per question. If you're thinking about a point value per question, you might be thinking about quizzes, which if you stay for the training that's after this, she's going to go through quizzes. So that's using the quizzing tool in Brightspace to create, like if you had a Word document with, you know, multiple choice questions and then problems that they have to work out and things like that, you can recreate that as a quiz in Brightspace, and that can have different points per question. Like a 10-question kind of like homework assignment. You know, some questions are worth 5 points, some are worth 1 point or whatever. That would be more of a quiz. Jennifer notices her view is different. So it may be, is it that you don't have this drop down that says assessments? Because if you're an adult ed educator and you're using like it's a hybrid course or something that this navigation bar is different, that's possible. But if you go into your sandbox, it should look like what we have now. An assessment drop down, no option in midterm and final lab exam. There was a question about, so in Brightspace, you build everything, and I'm going to hold that question off because you want to attend the quizzes workshop. Can you show us how our students upload an essay and how we can grade it through Brightspace? That's what we're doing here, Janet. Can students submit the work as an attachment in this assignment? So a student, you're going to see exactly how it is for a student. If you create the assignment with the type called file submission, that's what lets them attach it. That's what lets them upload a file. So there's the two types of assignments that you can create. One is a text submission where they type right on the screen and you're going to experience that. And the other one is that they upload a file to you. So we're going to make both. Okay. So now I'm going to go into the assignment tool. So again, for those of you, all of these tools that I'm showing, so in the instance where there was an instructor who's seeing a different view than I am, they don't have the same navigation bar, you can click on course admin and you actually see all of these same tools. So you can access any tool that you might not see in your nav bar, but again, that's very specific to this user. Across city colleges, other than adult education and certain program courses that have decided on a different navigation, you should see it the same way. But in course admin, there is the assignment tool is accessible from there too. So I'm going to click on assignments. And now from the tool, you can see there's my assignment 1 that I created from content. It automatically shows up back here. What I can also do from this tool is create new assignments. The only difference is when you're thinking about, well, how should I create my assignments? Should I create them from content or should I create them from the assignment tool itself? The difference is creating them from content is you're putting them exactly where you want them at the moment, and you're probably not too concerned about all the settings. You just want to give them a place to submit to. You're going to figure everything else out kind of later. Building from the tool is when you're a little bit more comfortable with Brightspace and you do want to explore all of those settings, or maybe you just want to build all your assignments at once and then add them to content later, which you can also do. So it depends on how you want to build these, but I'm going to go through the process of creating one more assignment with very simple settings, kind of like this one, except instead of it being a text submission, it's going to be a file submission so that you can experience both of those things as a student. So I'm going to click new assignment, and this time it starts off pretty similar. So I need a name, so this is going to be, I'm going to call this now assignment 2. I'm just going to put notes for myself that it's going to be a file upload. The instructions will be attach your paper 1 essay. I might also paste all of the instructions that they need to follow for that essay right here, or I can add an attachment if I have all the instructions in a Word document and I don't want to paste them here and make it long. To this assignment, and I should say upload. Below that, let's kind of talk about these other settings. So I can add attachments, like I said. You can also add video notes. So we were talking at the beginning before we even started the session that someone said they wanted to play with the video notes. Because these instructions have the HTML editor, you can add those verbal instructions if you wanted to, or kind of video instructions using the Insert Step tool. I'm not going to go through it. I do recommend attending the engagement tools training that we'll have tomorrow, but you can add a video note if you did want to explain those instructions in person. Below that, here's the assignment type where I was talking about. You can do an individual assignment or a group assignment, but note that you will only see the option for a group assignment if you've already created groups in your course, and that's something we're not covering here. The file submission type is what we talked about, we spent a lot of time on before. It can either be a file submission where they upload something, or a text submission where they type right on the screen. And these other two are meant for in-person handing in, so we're not going to cover those two. The next thing that says files allowed per submission, all of the defaults are absolutely fine. I'm just going through these settings so that you understand what they are if it's something that you wanted to use in the future. So files allowed per submission, unlimited means I'm going to this assignment as a student to upload my file, and let's say there's two things I want to give you. I want to give you my PowerPoint and a Word document for whatever reason. This unlimited allows me to upload 2 or more of those things all at once. If you wanted to limit that, we're like, I don't want all their stuff that they're sending me. I don't know why they're sending me out all this stuff to this one assignment. You can limit that to 1 file. Similarly, in the submissions is if you do have it set to unlimited, do you want to keep all the submissions, or do you want to keep only the most recent submission? Or do you want only 1 submission allowed? So that means how many, so for instance, this default is up until the due date or up until you as the instructor close that assignment, I can keep resubmitting this paper to that assignment. if I'm not ready, like I submitted it and then I was like, oh shoot, I made a mistake and I want to edit it and I'm going to resubmit to it up until the due date. Some instructors give students that ability. So in that case, you would say all submissions are kept, or you can decide if you only want to keep the first one because you don't want to see that they submitted it 5 times while they were trying to figure out, you know, all the edits they wanted to make or whatever. The only one submission is allowed is it basically lets them submit to that assignment once and they can't submit to it again. I'll pause for questions as soon as I get through this page before I go to the other settings. So notification email. This, there's a use case for it. It's why it exists, but I don't really recommend it, and I'll tell you why. What it is if you can put your email address in here, any email address actually, but typically an instructor will put their own email address in here, and you will get an email every time a student submits to this assignment. You can imagine that that gets really annoying really fast. So it's up to you. You can add an email in here. All it's doing is basically giving you an email every time someone submits. There's still a way for you to see who's submitting and when, where you don't need the email, but that's absolutely your choice. The category that you see here is different than what you might think of as categories when you think of a grade book and you have, you know, homework is worth 30% of the grade and papers are worth 10% of the grade and things like that. The category in an assignment is actually just a grouping of assignments. So it lets you, let's say you have like reading assignments, or not, reading assignments is a bad example, let me not say that. Homework assignments, essays, and something else. Those are the categories. It's basically a way to organize the assignment tool page. It does not have anything to do with grades. I'll put that there. Beneath that is where you add your points and your grade item. So in this case, I'm going to make this paper worth 25 points. And once again, I need to connect it to a grade item, because if I just leave it at 25 points, I can score it and evaluate it, but it's not going to show up in the grade book and it's not scoring anything. So I'm going to click New Grade Item, Numeric. I'm going to call it Assignment 2 again, and I'm going to make sure I change those points. So a name and a point value. Below that is I can add a rubric. So if you're using rubrics in Brightspace, which I don't think we have a training on this week, but we have a recording on it. Rubrics are really great, and you can grade with them, and it's really a nice process in Brightspace, so you could add that rubric here. And then these annotation tools that you see here are letting you kind of write on the screen or add comment boxes on the screen of student submissions. So you'll see that in a second. I recommend leaving that checked just so you can use it if you wanted to. So that's the Properties tab. I'm not done yet, so I actually need to scroll all the way back up to the top, and I'll see that there's 3 more tabs that I can kind of work with. Before I go to the Restrictions tab, I'm going to look at the notes, or the questions, I mean. The quizzes workshop is just after this one, so at 11 a.m. You can stay on this same Zoom. She'll be on here. How can we review the assignment? But we'll get to that, Professor Arfine. The navigation bar is okay. Students who use a college-provided Chromebook cannot use Word on the desktop. Yeah, so the Chromebooks, they can still use Word, but it's Word Online. So they go to their CCC account, and then they can download, when they go to File, Save it, they can download a copy of that, and then it's not something they can open in Word on the Chromebook, but they can still attach it. They can upload it as something that's filed on their computer. It can be complicated. If your students are using Chromebooks because they're part of adult education or whatever it might be, again, the text submission type, file type might be your best option. Okay. All right, great. Okay, so now on the Restrictions tab, so you can see there's a lot more settings to kind of think about here. On the Restrictions tab is where I can determine whether or not students can see it. So I'm going to unhide this. And then I have the options to add a due date, a start date, and an end date. So the due date is when I want that assignment to be due, but it doesn't stop students from being able to submit late. So if I choose, you know, I want this due on Friday at 11, someone can submit it on based on these settings here, someone can submit it on Saturday at 9 a.m. It will just mark it for me that it was late, but it doesn't stop them from being able to submit. If you want to stop them from being able to submit, you would also set an end date for the same time, basically Friday at 11. And then they can't submit to it anymore after that time. So it depends on how you like to operate in your class. The start date is when they can start submitting to that assignment. What's really nice about Brightspace is even if you have a start date that doesn't start until Tuesday or something like that, they can still see that it's an assignment coming up, just can't submit to it yet. So it basically becomes a dead link that they can't do anything with, but they still see that it's coming up and it's there and when it starts. So the start date is kind of the availability of when that assignment becomes available for them to submit to. And that's different than the hide from users, in that hide from users means they don't even know it exists. It just disappears, versus having a start date, they see it, they just can't do anything with it. Below that, we're not going to talk about release conditions in this training, but it does get covered in the engagement training, so I'm going to skip over that. And then special access is a way for you to kind of open up an assignment after the fact for a specific student. So if there's a student who has an excused absence and you want them to submit to this, you want them to upload it here so they don't email it to you, but it's closed to other students and you don't want to open it up because then other students will submit to it, that's when you can use special access. We have some knowledge base articles on that. I'm not going to go into it here because we still have to cover discussions, but that's a setting that you can set here. The objectives tab I'm also skipping over because it's not something we use right now at City Colleges, and it's not something that you can create yourself right now. Those settings are off. And then Turnitin, I'm not going to go into this in detail because we have a specific Turnitin training. But this is, if you are using Turnitin and you know what that is and you were wondering how you enable that, it's on the Turnitin tab from the assignment tool. So on this tab is where you would enable that, turn it on, and set all of your Turnitin settings. For those of you that don't know what Turnitin is, it's a third-party tool that does an assessment of originality, so you can see if students might be plagiarizing. But there's a lot of details that go into that, so I'm not going to cover that in this training. So once I've set all of the settings that I want for that assignment, I'm going to click Save and Close. And ultimately, I didn't change many of the defaults. Everything that was created was basically how that text submission assignment was created. So now I have 2 assignments. And this in parentheses that says file upload, I wrote that myself. It doesn't indicate what type of assignment it is from here for you. It does show you how many students have completed that. So here I have 0 of 3, how many students have evaluated and published their responses, and if I set up a due date. So this is that view as an instructor. So now as a student, I'm gonna go into student mode, real student mode. I'm gonna actually impersonate a student because you can't experience everything with view as student, that ability that you've seen underneath your name where it says view as student. Here mine says instructor because I'm an admin right now, but you can't do this next thing like that. I'm just gonna switch to an actual student so that you can see the experience of submitting. Before I do that, I'm just gonna check the questions again. There's a question about where do the assignments link to the calendar. As long as you put a start date or an end date or a due date, those all show up on the calendar. So we'll show that when I'm a student in a second. Will you demonstrate how to tie back to his content? So this last question, actually, yeah, before I become a student, let me show you. So if you do create all of your assignments from the tool itself, but then you want to post them in content so that they're in the week in which they happen. Under content, I'm going to go to week 2 for this because assignment 2 in my mind falls under week 2. To bring something in from that tool that you've created it in, you're going to use existing activities because it already exists. It's something that you've built. And then you click assignments from there and you can see all the assignments that you may have that are available from your tool itself. So you can see I see both of them here because anything I create in content also shows up in the tool itself. So here I can choose assignment 2. And now I brought in that assignment to content that I had not in content. Okay, so now I'm going to pause the screen for a second while I become a student. Okay, so now I'm a student. I'm in this class. I've got all the, there's no announcements. This happened to be a blank class other than the things that I have to do. And I'm going to refresh it once. Because typically it would say if there's an assignment due, but maybe it's too far into the future. So students, will access your assignments in many different ways. It kind of depends on how they figured out how to use Brightspace. So if they scroll down on this page, they can see the calendar here, and I can see that that assignment is due August 28th. That was based on me putting a due date in. It automatically shows up on the calendar. That is a way they can also access the assignment. But I'm going to walk you through the way that we would typically ask our students to do. But just know that there's multiple ways for them to get to the same thing. And so depending on how they're navigating your course, it may not be how you would expect. So in this case, a student can typically go to content or the assignment tool itself. Again, this is one of those things where you may assume they're navigating your entire course through content, but they may just be going to the assignment tool to see all the assignments that they have to do this term or week or whatever. And that can be really overwhelming for students to see because they'll see like 25 assignments there and then get confused as to what they should be doing when you expected them to access it from content. But that's going out of the way. I just want you to understand that they can go many different ways. So I'm going to go to content, and I'm going to go into week 1, and there I see the assignment that I need to do. So assignment 1, right? 2 paragraphs telling you about yourself. The student clicks on that assignment to submit to it. So they have to click on the header. And notice how, because some teachers get confused when there's that upload create button for themselves. Students don't see that. They just see what you put in here because those menus are for you as an instructor. So here they click on assignment 1 to submit to it. They see your instructions. It tells them whether or not they've submitted to it yet. And then this was a text submission assignment. So this was that assignment type where they can write right on the screen. So here are my 2 paragraphs. And then the student can click submit. Students will get an email every time they submit something to an assignment. So that's a good fail-safe. If they're not sure if you got it, they should get an email to their CCC email that it went through. And you can use that as a record. So now that's how the student submitted a text submission. Let me go back to content, and you see how now it shows me I've completed everything that's in that content module. That's really nice, and I get that nice check mark. So now I'm going to go to week 2 and do the upload of the file. So I've got my instructions, and this time I don't have a box that I can type in. I have to upload the file that my teacher wanted me to upload. So I'm going to click upload. I'm going to choose that sample assignment, or that, for me, this fake Word document that I'm submitting for my student or my teacher. Then it gives me a comments field once I click something to upload, and this is really just a message to you. It is not meant to be their text submission. And also, if you wanted to like work the system and say, okay, I'll use a file submission, then they can comment if they need to, they still have to upload something in order to get that box. So keep that in mind. It is either or in Brightspace. I don't know why. So then I'm going to click submit. And now I've submitted both of those documents. So from content, I can see as a student that I've done both of these things. I only get the check mark after I have done them. And I can see if I go to the tool itself, so as a student, if I go to the assignment tool, I can also see that I've submitted to those things. I can also see my score here if you've scored. And if I go to grades, all I'm going to see is that I have these 2 grade items, but they haven't been graded. So these are the ways that the students can see kind of what's coming up and all of that. That's a student experience. So now let me switch to the instructor experience of grading those. Okay, so now I come into my course as an instructor and I see, right away I see this update saying I have 2 new assignment submissions. So that kind of gives you a, hey, there's something for you to grade. There are 2 different ways that you can grade depending on, well, there's, again, multiple ways that you can get to the same place. But typically, if you're not using the grade book, so I'm going to show you both, but if you're not using the grade book, because we do have a lot of instructors that don't use the grade book, you can still provide feedback for this assignment. So for that, you can click on this. It's going to take you to the same place, but I'm going to go to the assignment tool, and I'm going to see there's new submissions here, and it tells me how many students completed here. So from here, I'm going to do a grade, not from the grade book, but this is if I want to see student submissions from here. I can either click on the number, which will take me to the same page that I'm going to go to in a second, or I can click on the drop-down arrow of that assignment name and click View Submissions. So from here, I'm going to see, this was a text submission, this specific one. So I'm going to see all the students who did it, and their submission that they've provided. And then there's this little evaluate button over here. But I can click on any one of these things to get to the same place. So I'm going to click on view submission, and I'm going to see there are 2 paragraphs right on the screen because this was not an uploaded document. This was them typing on the screen. On the right-hand side is where I can score it. So I can give them their 10 out of 10. I can add any feedback I want. I can record a video note if I wanted to, and then I'm going to publish that. So that's grading from the assignment tool. The other way you can grade is from the grade book. So under assessments, grades, because we attach this to a grade item, you're going to have a grade column in the grade book, and you're going to see an icon anywhere that a student completed this. So if I come to the grade book, because I'm attaching all of my things to the grade book, I'm going to be able to see when students complete the work based on this icon. So in this case, assignment 2, I'm going to grade from the grade book here. So I'm going to click on that icon. It's going to open that student's paper. If it doesn't load right away, I'm going to click on their document here. It's going to render right on the screen, so I can read everything here. I can use these annotation tools here, and then I can give them a score and any feedback that I want. Maybe they don't get 25 points. And then I click publish. And when I click back to submissions, this is kind of strange. It goes back to the assignment tool, but I still have my grades tool open over here. And if I were then to refresh this page, you'll see that new score here. So that's the grading experience. I'm going to pause here. We're going to save the questions for the end because I want to make sure I get to discussions now. So that's the process of creating, submitting, and grading the assignments for students. Now let's do discussions. Discussions we can get through a little bit faster because you already have the background of the difference between content and the tool itself. So let's say in week 1, I also have an introduction discussion that I want them to do. I want all of them to post their introductions, and then I want them to reply to each other, respond to each other, maybe rate each other. So under Upload Create, this is how I can do it simply from content. I'm going to click New Discussion. We'll go into the tool afterwards to see all of the settings. So this is I'm going to call this Introduction Discussion. I'm going to unhide it from users so I don't forget. And I'm going to say, write a paragraph. Introducing yourself. We're not worried about typos today. Oh, and I'm so glad this happened. For discussions, you have to have a forum before you can create a topic. A forum, similar to how I was describing categories in the assignment tool, is a container for your topics. So you can have in your discussion tool, you can have one discussion forum just called discussions, and all the different topics or discussion activities that you're going to have in your class are topics inside that forum. Or you can create groupings or different forums for the different types of topics. So for instance, if you have in week 1, you're going to do 2 different discussions, you might create a forum called week 1 discussions, and then you have the intro discussion topic, and then you have maybe the other discussion topic that you might have. So forums, when I'm just getting started before I really understand what all of that means, and I just want a place for my discussions, I'm going to create just a generic forum called discussions. There's nothing else you really need to do here. It just has to exist in order for a topic cannot exist without a forum, but students can't interact with a forum. It literally is just a container of topics. So now I click Save, and I'm not going to go through all of the settings here because I'm going to talk about all of these settings once we get to the tool, but I am going to create a grade item. This is going to be 15 points, and I'm going to add that grade item again, intro, discussion. Did I say 15 points? Yes. Create and save. So now that discussion is created. Students can interact with it. It's completely ready to go. But let's go to the tool itself to see where those get stored and what the other settings are. So if I go to Assessments and Discussions, now I can see this is my forum. That's what I was saying. I can't do anything with this forum. It's just a forum. Students can't interact with it. But here's my topic. you see how there's a link to it and you can actually click on it and then see all of the threads in those discussions, all of the student posts. So if I wanted to create a new discussion or a new topic or a new forum, I could do that from the tool here. Again, forum is just a container. So I'm going to skip that and click new topic. And this might be my week 2 discussion topic. So when I build from the tool, all of these settings start to look a little bit like in the assignment tool. So I have this tab at the top. I have these tabbed approaches. I also have to choose a forum first. So because I've created that generic forum called discussions, I'm going to put that in there. The topic type is that it's open, meaning everyone can see it and respond. There is the ability to also do group discussions, and that is dependent on you already having groups set up in your course. So that's not being covered today, but you can so that they only see their group's responses. So I'm going to call this week 2 discussion. My description would be all of my instructions for what they're meant to do for that discussion topic. The settings down here to allow anonymous posts, that is if you want students, let's say you're wanting them to, like this might be a cafe that's kind of an open space to ask questions. You might allow anonymous posts if students aren't comfortable revealing that they were the one that had the question. But typically you're not really doing anonymous posts because if you're trying to assess these things and grade them, you need to know who posted them. The second option, which is a moderator must approve individual posts before they display in the topic, what that means is you yourself will get an email every time a student responds, and you have to indicate whether or not it's approved to go live. That can get really out of hand as well, but it's there if that's something that you want to do. The third option is users must start a thread before they can read and reply to other threads. What's nice about this is if you're worried about students reading someone else's response and then kind of just making it their own and then posting, this can restrict them from being able to do that because it means they won't see anything, they won't see that any other student has responded to this discussion until they've posted their own. Please be very communicative about that if that's what you're using, because students do not get a clear indicator that that's what's happening, that they can't see others until they've posted. And so sometimes they don't post because some students are like, well, I'll wait until everyone else posts so that I feel more comfortable posting. And then they never do because they think no one else posted, and it's because you set this. So just make that clear. I fully support this setting, but just make it clear to students that they won't see anyone else's post until they do their first post. This option to rate posts is something that you can use depending on if you're interested in it. No ratings just leaves it at that. A 5-star rating means students can kind of give other students a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 kind of rating. And I've seen that used in instances where, you know, they're trying to, as a class, they're going to vote on what their next topic is going to be. And so the teacher will say, okay, vote on your favorite, and the ones with the most stars will get whatever it needs. You can also do an up-down vote where like students can up or down vote other students or like other students' posts. I don't like the down option as much, so there is an up vote only, where like students can also, it's kind of like giving students a like, you know, like students still have to reply to other students, but you might give them the ability to like, oh, I really liked your comment, I'm done replying, I don't really have anything else to say, but I want to give you a little plus. I like that up vote option. Not required. So again, I get to the bottom of my screen, and in Brightspace, I have to scroll up to see what other settings I may have missed before I move along. So on the restrictions tab, and I'm running close on time, so I'm going to try to make sure we get through how students respond to these. On the restrictions tab, again, very similar to assignments, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's where you set the start and end date. You can't set a due date on a discussion. It's very strange, but it's because typically you have students who have to post on certain days and then reply on other days, and so it's really hard for the system to understand how those due date things work. So you would indicate in the instructions, like your first post is due on Monday and your second post is due then. And you can change the availability there. The locking options that you see here means it allows them to still, so if you lock a discussion, it allows them to still see all of the discussions and replies, but they can't respond to it. So some instructors will lock a discussion after the real due date because they want students to be able to see all of the content. They want them to see all of the things that people said because it's good to study from or whatever. but they don't want students to then submit after the due date because the teacher doesn't want to go in and have to figure out who wasn't supposed to submit and whatever, because there's not really a due date on discussions. So that's what the locking options are for. It means it's visible, it's readable, but they can't submit to it. Whereas the end date would be they can't even get into the topic anymore after that end date. So those are those settings there. And then same restrictions that you have in the assignment. And then lastly is an assessment tab. Different than the assignment tool where you put where you attach it to the grade book is right on that properties tab. In discussions and quizzes, it's on its own tab called assessment. So here it tells me I don't have a grade item for this. I'm going to create one. 15 points. And I'm going to make this 15 points. And then again, you can add a rubric. You can also allow assessment of individual posts, but I will warn you what this is if you want to grade their initial post and the replies separately, this will make each of those things 15 out of 15. So be aware of that, that if the whole discussion, their first post and their 2 replies are totally worth 15 points, don't use this option here. That's only for if you're trying to assess every individual thing and each thing is worth like 5 points, then you would make this 5 and allow assessment of individual posts. It's hard to control that though, because if they keep continuing to post, you'd have the ability to get like 35 points or whatever. So generally speaking, most people aren't doing that. And the objectives tab we're not using. So I'm going to click save and close. Let's quickly make sure that we can submit as a student before we do anything. So I'm going to impersonate a student. Okay, so here I'm a real student. I'm going to go either to content or the discussion tool. Either one I can get there. So from content, I'm going to go to week 1. And there's my introduction discussion. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to see my instructions, and then this ability to start a new thread. So I click start a new thread, and I'm going to say, I'm Elissa. This is my intro. By default, it checks this box that says subscribe to thread, which means I'll get a notification up here every time someone posts to that discussion, like if someone responds to me or something. Then all I do is click post, and there's my response. Now to reply, so let's pretend I'm a student, I'm another student. I can still do it on my own, but let's pretend I'm another student. And I come in here and I access it either from content or discussions. Let's go back to content. I see the student's post, I can see their messaging, but to reply, even though everything shows up on this page, to reply, I actually have to click on their response directly. Once I've clicked on their response, I can then click reply to thread and say, hey, Elissa, nice to meet you. And that's my reply to them, even though I'm replying to myself, and then post. So now I've gotten my initial post, and then I've responded to that same post initially. There was a question about, can you not see student view by changing the upper right-hand corner? The reason why I need to be a real student for this is because the experience as view as student, when you're clicking on this and you do view as student, that is a view as, not a do as. So it doesn't actually create a fake student for you to work with. So while you can see these screens, it's not a true student. So that's why for the training purposes, I'm showing you as an actual student, because you're not going to have that same experience when you're in your class. It's a different experience. Okay, now to grade this. So to view discussion posts, you're always going to get this message that's saying 2 unread discussion posts, and it'll take you right to that place. Or you can go to the discussion tool directly. So in the discussion tool, I can see kind of an overview, how many. Sorry, the trainer for the next session is here. So I'm going to keep wrapping up. You will see how many threads and how many posts and any ones that are new here, and you can review this, but this is not a helpful way to grade because you have to click on each topic, you have to click on each post, and you have to read the replies. It's a very cumbersome process. But if you connect it to the grade book, if you go to assessments and grades, and you see this little bubble icon that tells you that the student has submitted to that discussion, and you can grade in the same way that you graded the assignments. I can click right on that bubble, and what it lets me do is see everything that student posted. So it kind of condenses it. I can see their initial post, and I can see any replies that they may have done to other students. And then at the top of that, I can provide feedback where I can give them a score and then publish that. And then it has their score in there. So that's the easiest way to do grading from discussions. So I'm going to stop here. We are totally out of time. Oh, we have 4 minutes. Great. We're totally out of time. I'm going to stop and make sure I answer any questions in the chat. If you do have questions, just hang on for a second while I get to the ones in the chat first. There's a question about uploading files if the capacity is more than 1 gig. Do we have to place it in a zip folder? You can link to it if you want to upload that to something external like your OneDrive. You can link to the large file from Brightspace. Just basically use a share link from OneDrive. I already answered the default number of submission settings for document. We can set the number. You can't set the number of submissions. It's either you allow unlimited submissions or 1 submission. So it's either or. You can't say only 2 submissions. When it comes to quizzes, which you'll learn in the next session right after this one, you can't. Quizzes do allow you to say like they have 1 attempt or multiple attempts. Can students post a link to the Google Doc? Students can only post a link to their Google Doc if you use a text submission and that they actually use a shared link, because a lot of students don't know how to share from Google Docs. So no, generally I would recommend that they find another way. I know that's rude to say right now, but it's because I can't go into that question fully. I keep forgetting not to press return and question is not edited. During submission, is there a default number? Oh no, I answered that. Is there a way to provide written feedback? I think I covered the showing where you provide written feedback when we were grading. It was on the right-hand side of the screen when you were grading. And you can watch this recording. Can we not see student view by changing? I talked about that. Okay, great. That's all the questions. We have 2 minutes. What I'm going to do is, because I won't be able to get to kind of open this up because we do have the quizzes training right after this, please stay on the line if you are staying for the quizzes training. And I will be sending out the recording when we're done. And if you did have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email me there too. I can answer those there. Thank you so much for coming. If you're not staying for the quizzes training, you can click the little leave meeting button in the lower right-hand corner. And if you are staying, Viviana will be coming on shortly. Well, she's here.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Oh, I can see all your faces.
Hey, thank you, Elissa.
Thank you so much, Elissa.
Just